King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, a weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Here is the King of Podcasts. It's everywhere you see it or hear it when you look at what's going on with the digital disruption affecting the stock market today as I record today. As I'm recording this for documentation, the GameStop stock, the issue with Wall Street Bets, the Reddit forum, and the accompanying other things, and the issues with the hedge funds losing money on having to go ahead and cover their shorts in the stock market because of the fact that this ragtag, rabble-rousing group of Reddit connected investors are dealing with issues to go ahead and call out the hedge funds. And, it's amazing what people are actually on the side of the small-time investors as opposed to the institutional investors, the corporates versus the real, the grassroots. As I talk about the parallel mainstreams, the corporate mainstream doesn't like this going on, right? But the parallel mainstream, the crossover, organic mainstream accepts it. They like it. They like when everybody gets a chance to crack at being successful. That's how it is in media. And the streaming media right now, of which, YouTube or Twitch or, Periscope or whatever you have for live or on-demand streaming, you've been kind of susceptible to that for a long time. And it's been amazing to see all of the things that are going on with it. And what's the funniest part of all this is the panic mode that the corporate mainstream establishment is dealing with right now and how they are scrambling, as I talk about it on this program tonight, as I title the show, the corporate media establishment's scramble for streaming media solace. Because they are trying to go ahead and continue to keep their pipeline of profit going. And the problem is that their linear systems, they're, starting to become antiquated, dated systems of programming. The content being provided to those people are now seeing that what they're getting on linear or cable or just anything that is established, where you have to go ahead and use a device to go and watch, when it's not something that is online. Offline content is, you can start feeling the effects of it being substandard. And there are so many changes being made right now within the space that all of you content creators need to be aware of because it's becoming much more prominent than ever. And we're seeing all that in front of us. That's how this Broadcasters Podcast begins tonight. A couple stories are going to bring you into tonight. And also I want to go and talk about branding and the issues when it comes to television and just, some great thoughts and ideas that a lot of people should be thinking about going forward. Is a great interview that I meant to go and start off last week, but I pushed it to this week because I was speaking so much about the 10-year music cycle, which I thought was a fascinating subject. So apologies to those involved that helped me go ahead and, facilitate the interview with my featured guest later on in the hour is strategist, instructor, and thought leader Lee Hunt, the partner, and co-founder of CMO Marketplace. And to give you a heads up, he is a longtime entertainment marketing strategist and thought leader who has shared his on-air analysis with TV networks and channel brands, including the likes of Lifetime, VH1, and TNT, whom he helped to launch. That gives you the kind of background he has. A great hour-long conversation now with him. Part one starts in about 30 minutes or so from now. As soon as I go and wrap up the headlines that are going on this week that I think are very, very important. So we're going to look at top trends in the media industry as it's being looked at, the future of movie theaters, some predictions on streaming media for the year 2021, and how streaming is now going to incorporate more live sports than ever because now all the properties that could be valuable towards streaming because of the constant influx of subscribers all across the board. Peacock reaching 30 million subscribers, Disney Plus 80 plus million, Netflix surpassing 200 million. All these people making their way, cutting the cable cord, saying goodbye, good riddance, we're going to move on. If everything moves over there, then streaming it just becomes commonplace. And one of the stories I just saw as well is about the amount of media that's about to go ahead and could be consumed. About 40% of the media industry will be online this year. That's the plan. That's where we are going right now. Quite fascinating when you look at it. So let's go and look at, first of all, Digiday. That tells us about the media industry's top trends at the moment. Now, they say that last year, there was a lot of changes. Returns to the office and in-person events and on-set shoots are going to be starting to return. Other changes are steps towards the future, new subscription programs and commerce platforms and 24/7 streaming channels. And others still remain to be seen. What will actually replace the third-party cookie? Newer platforms like Substack and TikTok, will they continue to rise? And will many more media companies consolidate, and to what end? That's what's going on. So Digiday brings up a couple of points they think are key hits to what's going on. Now, one is the request for proposal, the RFP, the standard of selling media inventory and signing brand deals. So the implementation of digital media upfronts have been more common as publishers look to pre-plan their sponsorship businesses, but only a fraction of deals can be signed that far in advance. So again, the advertising model completely going to be changed. That's one thing that's coming up. Media companies will likely continue to consolidate. So we started seeing a lot of moves. Group 9 grabbed Pop Sugar, Vox Media acquired New York Media, Vice purchased Refinery 29. So a lot of these blogs and a lot of these other publications are all consolidating with each other. And that's also as a result of all the layoffs that we saw last year. And the SPAC trend, it's looking to catalyze more consolidation, because now we're going to see BuzzFeed and Bustle Digital Group are considering going public via SPACs. According to CNBC, Vice is looking to keep an eye on, as is Vox Media. So the thing is, now they're going to go public because they're going to keep some way to go and keep money coming in. And if they go ahead and take the support of the public, the institutional investors, of course, that are invested in this, that's what they're going to do. They're going to go public. So they're going to be more corporate than ever. No more privatization for some of these companies. So you're going to see the news go completely public. With, again, it's shareholders. And it's going to be, really, you're going to just see who's going to be in charge of all these mainstream media outlets. Is that a good thing? No. But again, all these mergers being completed before the pandemic, they're helping the companies get through 2020. But how will they hold up as more conglomerates are concocted, and whether each amalgam ends up making a good match? Now, Google is also trying to go and replace the cookie. They're looking to do a replacement proposal called Fledge, and they want to replace third-party cookies. That's the ongoing thing that's coming up as well. Publishers joining the streaming wars, because now pivoting to Facebook and then YouTube, publishers are reorienting once again. So the time is turning attention to the TV screen. So digital video publishers have already stood up, connecting TV properties, standalone apps, and Apple and Roku CTV platforms. And 24 streaming channels are distributed for free ad-supported streaming services like Pluto TV. But now, traditionally tech-centric publishers are shifting into social video, making their moves into connected television because they need to find a place to be seen. Because people are not engaging what's going on now with everything else. And that's what's going on. Not good for them at all, right? Now, also, publishers are going to be wringing out of more of what they have. So they're saying that doesn't mean publishers are going back to things that are antiquated. The things that are going to emerge are going to be the most uncertain stretches, but what they're looking for is to turn the page and try something new and see what they can do. So again, they're talking about now the year of the SPAC. If you don't know what it is, it's a special purpose acquisition company. The trends are because many of the same media companies are at the center of the consolidation current. And that's what they're going for. It's another thing to thought. Now, there's much more that can be talked about in that story, but I'll leave that all for you right there. That's one thing I was looking at right now is the overall look. How about streaming media predictions going on? Well, here's what we got now. The future movie theaters and other 20 and 21 streaming media predictions. So they're saying that in this, obviously, huge growth in 2020. Where does it go from here? When it comes to theaters, they say that the reports of the demise are greatly exaggerated. This is from Forbes.com. So as we know, Warner Brothers releasing all their 2021 movies on HBO Max. We're seeing it across the board, the little things. The new movie with Denzel Washington and Jared Leto is coming up this weekend. Again, on over-the-top platforms. Again, streaming simultaneous with the theaters. Now, when it comes to the theaters, AMC saying it will go bankrupt without $750 million. Global cinema revenue has already dropped 66% in 2020. And Regal is announcing the closure of 536 theaters with no targeted reopening date. Still don't know when they're coming back. And I don't know if we're going to get a Regal theater to go back to it soon. But that's where we are. Now, as for the things that are going on, putting movies onto streaming platforms, HBO Max already stands to lose more than $1 billion by releasing movies on HBO Max. And it's a gamble to see if it's going to get enough people to go and come on board. Now, so far, they said the Wonder Woman 1984 experiment has worked thus far. They got 40 million subscribers so far. But again, they're losing money as we speak. So they're taking a big risk. Now, next, they're saying that the number of streaming services will continue to grow. And again, what's going to have to happen is we're going to see platforms that are going to be standalone. They're going to have to conglomerate as well. They're going to have to consolidate. So one of the stories I talked about on my Wrestling is Real podcast, which I recorded the day before on Wednesday nights going into Thursday. Well, the WWE Network, which has been a standalone service, $10 a month for wrestling fans to want to watch all the legacy 17,000 hours of WWE content and all their live pay-per-views. They get that for $10 a month. Well, now it's going to Peacock. The entire network is moving over there on a account that NBC Universal has just paid. They're paying up to an excess of $1 billion for the next 5 years to have access to put their entire library, WWE's library, into Peacock. That's how important it is. There's more on the sports front we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But anyway, services will start to shake out as many services increase prices again. Increasing prices are going to be coming up by the likes of Netflix, Hulu, and Disney Plus, because the market won't tolerate more than a few premium price services, and the top tier providers at $7 to $8, the others sub $4. So again, there's going to have to be some conglomeration somehow, somewhere. That's probably where we're going to be going next. But again, some of these platforms already have to get started and then established for them to go and be picked up, and then eventually partnerships and then acquisitions. It just goes like that. Nielsen reported that 80 ad-supported options will be increasingly appealing to cash-strapped consumers affected by rising unemployment brought on by the pandemic who feel maxed with subscription services. And there was a study recently that 76% of viewers are willing to watch commercials in exchange for free content. So there's still room to have advertising there. That's what some people need to think about as well, to go ahead and pay for the product besides the subscriptions. Now, we know that 2019 and 2020 content providers were looking to get their content back. So NBC pulling The Office from Netflix to be a Peacock exclusive. And there are other things that were going on right now. One study said that if U.S. consumers averaged about 4 paid services per household, the key would be for any streaming services to not limit its entire business by forcing it into one channel. The bigger players have established their own services and cleaned up their licensing deals. So with Netflix, they've already built an impressive library content, original content library, but they will not be able to maximize revenues on its catalog unless it licenses content to other services. So Netflix is exploring other ways to earn revenue, including offering free access to some of its most popular movies and shows, and licensing the content to other services. That's the idea of that. So again, there's a lot of things that are going on that we're just looking at, and it's crazy. Crazy. Now, we were talking about the cinemas, and so far the latest information I can find about it is, again, AMC Theaters said to Variety magazine that they're calling it enough cash to make it through the dark coronavirus-impacted winter. They have a financial runway extended deep into 2021. Now, maybe some of the stock price manipulation or the pushing, the pump by the rabble-rousing investors, the grassroots investor base, the Robinhood types, they are helping probably AMC out in some way, shape, or form. We don't know what's going to be the end result for that. So there's that going on. Next, Regal Cinemas, they are joining the club on release window deals. They're joining AMC and other theater chains and arranging deals with Hollywood studios to shorten theatrical release windows. Now, once they move them, they probably won't be able to go back. So we're going to see some simultaneous stuff like this going on. The only thing that might be the saving grace for movie theaters is that once the theaters are back up, people are vaccinated, and they feel comfortable to go back out again, then what will happen is basically just say that, okay, well then Do you want to pay $19 to watch a movie for only so long in your home? Or do you want to just take the movie experience? I'm still going to take the movie experience myself, except for the HBO Max. If it's already part of my package, that's a different story. Netflix already promising one movie every week for a whole year. Again, these are things that are going on. But again, the quality of the movies has to be taken into account. Warner Brothers is not going to be able to stick around and keep the HBO Max thing going, I think, going into next year like this. I don't know what they're going to do, but they have to figure out how it's going to work out. But again, movie theaters have to open back up to really see what's going to go on all together. We have to wait for all of that to come about to really see what it really becomes. That's what it is. Now, another story from Course.com about sports fans and the streaming future of live sports. Because, again, with the WWE deal to Peacock, we really want to look at what's going on. NBC Sports Network being phased out at the end of the year, and all the live sports programming is going to go to Peacock. So how much more live sports can go this way? That's what we're going to be seeing. Now, NFL AFC Championship game viewers retreated to commercials from Viacom CBS and its new Paramount Plus service. And they're boasting that Paramount Plus includes live sports among its various offerings. Peacock is doing the same thing. So anyway, the idea of long-time live sports exclusives to streaming felt like part of a far-off future. With the old-fashioned cable TV bundle, it was weakening as companies began shifting to digital platforms. And now, audiences might be shrinking, but sports were and still are one of the few kinds of entertainment that reliably draw the viewerships that advertisers covet. And they might have been looking towards the streaming future, but sports were still a staple of linear TV, and that was unlikely to change. But the streaming boom has happened faster than most executives anticipated. Now, online platforms need sports content to tap into new audiences and drive subscription growth. You're getting that male demographic there, over that way. So again, we just talked about the NBC Sports Network. All the content going to Peacock, that's going to go. It goes to that's National Hockey League, NASCAR, English Premier League soccer, among other professional college sports leagues. And we talked about the WWE streaming platform. There's also that as well. And we also know, how Amazon Prime has been the first to go and host NFL games exclusively on their service. Disney is acquiring more and more sports distribution rights for ESPN Plus, and HBO Max is expected to eventually offer live sports as early as this year through its Turner Sports division. Warner Media already owns the broadcast rights to Major League Baseball, the NBA, airing on networks like TBS and TNT. And Viacom, well, they're also going to try to do the same thing where they're going to try to go and offer live sports first above news and entertainment. NFL will still be on the CBS TV network and on the streaming service for the time being. The NFL may not be inclined to sell exclusive rights to streamers when the league's media rights expire in 2022, which is another thing. When all this comes into play, what's going to happen to all these different things, these sports entities and the franchises and the broadcast agreements they come up with? Because that's going to be very interesting altogether, what they're going to become. Now, moving along, another story that came across that really kind of encompasses the entire issue of the streaming wars is TheRinger.com having a story titled, "The Streaming Wars Are Turning into a Game of Catch-Up." So, once again, everybody has their own comments about this. Now, the highest profile streaming launch of the past few months is WandaVision, the debut Marvel series on Disney+, the official melding point of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the non-cinematic Marvelverse. So, we don't know how it's going to do so well. This kind of Dick Van Dyke show kind of feel to it. Don't know how it's going to be, but again, it's not a show I was actually interested in watching myself. But again, they try to attach the Marvel Cinematic Universe behind it, and I guess that's supposed to flock people over. But again, if you have Disney Plus, you might as well go and check it out for yourself, right? So soon, The Mandalorian and WandaVision will be joined by a barrage of companions, a part of the plan in early stages with no signs of slowing down. We talked all about that a couple weeks ago. Two pieces of news were leaked from Warner Media this week. And that's bet heavily on the service of the company's future. And one is they're going to develop yet another Game of Thrones prequel in addition to House of the Dragon, and a since-scrapped pilot starring Naomi Watts. The new series will be called The Tales of Dunk and Egg, a series of novellas. That's about a century before the show, and then a potential Harry Potter series. A concept so preliminary has no set writers, actors, directors, or even slant on the material. So again, HBO wants to try to get to the Games of Thrones thing. They want to use it for HBO Max. Got it. Warner Media has a DC universe, and they've been unable to match what Marvel's been able to do, but they did have success with Wonder Woman 1984. That gave a subscription spike, to HBO Max. There we go. And Disney already has shown one massive franchise to buoy your multimedia efforts is good. 2 or even 3 is even better. Replicating the Marvel or Star Wars model is not as simple as snapping one's fingers. Even Star Wars has stumbled with Solo and The Rise of Skywalker, and Warner Media wants to play up its assets. So that's what they're going in. And as we talk about streaming, again, so much being brought into this right now, especially with Peacock. And then they also have other shows they're putting together. We're able to get back The Office as an access, doing full seasons of original series like Brave New World and Saved by the Bell, the return of Saved by the Bell. And, of course, the soccer and all the other things you're going to be having as well. Meanwhile, Netflix is top dog. They've been ahead of the game this whole time. And right now, their latest earnings report for the fourth quarter, which was announced from this month, they announced what they did in the fourth quarter of 2020. The company had a surprising figure on the top of its typical subscriber tallies, 0. The amount of debt it plans to take going forward to finance its dizzying output of original films. So remember about 6 months to a year ago, I talked about how Netflix had previously taken on $16 billion in debt, and I thought that was going to be the end of the company. Well, I was wrong. Pandemic helped them so much, which is one thing that's got to be said about why all these other companies have been so willing to scurry around to go and move up and forward to go and be a part of this streaming paradise right now of getting all this content over here for people that are anxiously waiting for new content to go and stream. They're all going to it, and they might be willing to go and buy new services, new subscriptions, all that's out there. So HBO and Peacock are vying for consideration. The financial turning point is also a reminder that Netflix is just much further along in its big picture timetable, even though it started without the muscle of Disney or Warner Media behind it. They have 204 million subscribers worldwide, 66 million in the US. Netflix is what a fully mature streaming service looks like. And again, HBO Max will be expanding internationally. Paramount Plus will be restructured as a part of what will CBS All Access. And then Disney has the master plan. But again, there's so much money, so much resources, so much power coming up here. Let's see what they do next. It's a fascinating story. Now, before we go and wrap things up and go into our interview time with Lee Hunt, I want to go and give one quick homage. When I talk about people when it comes to radio, and I haven't talked much about radio as of late, I did a little bit during the 10-year music cycle, obviously. But again, one thing I thought was very important to me anyway. A guy I actually listened to on the radio for a long time. You know, he was on the area in Miami as a DJ here for roughly 3 decades, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and worked at some of the top stations here. The Summit Media Executive Vice President of Programming, Bill Tanner, or would be Bill or Tanner in the morning, when he was on Y100 or he was on Power 96 here in Miami. So he passed away at his home in Birmingham, Alabama at the age of 75. His career spanned 5 decades and also was known for his brilliant approach to radio programming and had number 1 stations in markets ranging from South Florida to Los Angeles. Now, a partner of his that worked with him in programming, going back to his days at Heftel Broadcasting, which was original owner of Y100, was Carl Palmer. He says that I had the honor of working alongside Bill since the early 90s from our days at Heftel Broadcasting. All those who knew Bill came to respect his skills and watch in awe how he connected with listeners. They formed Summit Media, a company formed to purchase a number of radio stations divested by Cox Radio. As I mentioned, Bill Tanner began his career doing mornings in Jackson, Mississippi in the 70s. Then he moved to Miami, did the Tanner in the Morning show on Y100. Soon thereafter, vice president of programming for parent company Heftel Broadcasting. And then Tanner also then worked again, like I said. He introduced the concept of rhythmic CHR into the industry mainstream, as well as helped creating WXDJ, which became the top Spanish language station in Miami. And Tanner went back to his roots. He launched 2 new urban stations in Birmingham for H&P Radio. And again, it did so much. this is one of the guys in our market here in Miami that was very responsible for doing, again, he created formats. He created excitement, just at a time when radio was really good. He was one of the few guys who was really a programming, really, you could just tell he had his hand on this. And the Heftel people let him do that. And look at the variety he was able to do. He was doing top 40, rhythmic CHR, and Spanish, tropical. And he did it. And he was very successful at it. And again, then he went ahead and did what he wanted to do in Birmingham, and just figured a way out. And he had a long career. I know there was one thing that happened where he had a little bit of controversy I always heard about when he left Power 96, because there was something to be said about some kind of something that he had some kind of a relationship they tried to say with a teenager. I don't know if that was actually true or not, but that was always some kind of a lore that I heard, some rumor. I'm not sure if that was true, but either which way, he worked in the market for many years, and Bill Tanner was a great, again, passed away at age 75, wanted to give homage, Godspeed to Bill Tanner, and for all that he has done to contribute to the world of radio. I wish we had more people that actually know how to go and consult and program radio like Bill Tanner. We don't have anybody like that right now. Radio needs a renaissance, and I don't know who's going to be coming back for that yet. We're going to go ahead and leave it there. Time for me to go ahead and bring you our featured interview segment again with Lee Hunt. I explain who he is, and we get right into the conversation. Check it out right here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Interview time here once again on the Broadcasters Podcast. Let's go. My next guest is a longtime entertainment marketing strategist and thought leader who has shared his on-air analysis with TV networks and channel brands for years, including launching and branding Lifetime, VH1 and TNT. We're talking about heralding some major cable channels at the true prime peak of cable television. He holds the distinction of working with more entertainment brands around the world than any other strategist. I'm here with the publisher and editor-in-chief of CMO Marketplace, Lee Hunt, here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Lee, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here.
My pleasure. I was really looking forward to this when I got the opportunity, because for what you did, as a part of your legacy of what you've done for many years is, again, branding. And I just feel like there's something where it's such a lost art now. And part of it is because in the spectrum of, say for cable anyway, when it was kind of the Wild West days, when not all the companies were consolidated into only a handful of companies now, and you see where things have gone. I mean, obviously, great ideas come across, and of course, there will always be technological evolution and change that will make things turn around, and that's what I see here. But obviously, same way the platforms will change and evolve, so will what you'll be doing in your own business. So let's talk about where you're at now. So these days, you're helping to inform the decisions of chief marketing officers around the world, and by way of your new venture at CMO Marketplace, which is an intuitive, time-saving way to connect buyers and sellers of creative services. And this global portal is going to offer a streamlined and painless alternative to the classic agency client business development model, accessible 24/7. Anyone can register for free. That's amazing. Just that much access, that much experience in one place. Talk to me about your effort to consult with a classic agency client business model.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Lori Pate, who's my partner in this, has represented me for strategy for the last 20 years. And she's also represented a lot of other creative services companies. And a couple of years ago, she started telling me that business development has just gotten so difficult that clients are incredibly pressed for time. There are so many new, smaller agencies out there, everybody clamoring for some mind share with all these different media companies. And she said, she has deep relationships with a lot of them, and they'll take lunch with her or a meeting, but they're very busy people, and she'll be demonstrating the work of whatever company she's representing. And she said they're interested, but of course, once the meeting's over, they completely forget about it because they don't have a need right at the moment. So she was saying, I wish there was some way that technology could solve this problem. And I said, well, explain to me what you mean more. And she talked more detail. And I have another company called CMO Intelligence, and we track the on-air marketing of 40 linear and streaming services and provide both creative and analysis. And it's built on a portal that was originally created as the research portal for Comcast, NBCU, the Walt Disney Company. So it's a very robust piece of technology. that's owned by a company called One Touch Intelligence. And I had partnered with them back in 2015, and we created CMO Intelligence, and most of the major media companies, the portfolio companies, use our service to track all their competitors and see what's out there. And I said, I think that same technology could work for us, but it's sort of the inverse, where right now the media companies pay for access to CMO Intelligence. We'll give them access to the marketplace for free. And the idea is that agencies pay to have a showroom in the marketplace. And what's so amazing about the portal that we use is it's incredible for filtering. You can break down to the most granular level. So if I'm a marketer and let's say I'm ABC and I'm looking for a new campaign for a new show, I can say, well, I want to find agencies that have an expertise in animation and comedy, and I can break it down all the way to whatever particular idea I've been thinking about for the launch of a new show. And then all these agencies work, their projects show up, and it's a very democratic platform, is that everybody's represented equally. So the work really speaks for itself. So you can do an apples to apples comparison.
I want to ask you now, before we move along here, because I also want to ask about more about your relationship with Lori working on CMO Marketplace. When it comes to working with these clients and having them understand the granularity of what you're offering, I guess, was there any kind of a learning curve for them? Because, now they've kind of been balancing between streaming and their traditional, programming model, and looking at where they need to go and understand what their older audience that might be starting to step away from traditional methods of viewership into the digital streaming age that we're in now. And obviously that evolution has changed. When you first started this out, it was only 5 years ago. I don't think many traditional media, establishment, corporate media institutions really cared too much about streaming at that point. I don't think they thought Netflix or Apple TV or Hulu or others were going to be over-the-top channels or networks were going to be so prominent and we're going to take over as much as they did.
Yeah, and you're right. And that's for CMO Intelligence, which is really a competitive tool. When we started out, it was just linear networks. And then the last few years, we started adding all the streaming services. And now much of the work that is tracked when we look at what the different media companies are using, they're looking to see what is Netflix, what is Disney Plus, what is HBO Max, what are they all doing now? How are they promoting? How are they driving acquisition? How are they promoting titles? How do they differentiate themselves from other streaming services? So it's been interesting to see how they follow that. And the same thing on the marketplace side, which is really a tool for marketers to find creative agencies to work with. We found in tracking the results is that most of the media companies are looking at the work that has been done recently, whether it be to launch Disney Plus or Peacock. Definitely the streaming services have an edge in the kind of work that entertainment marketers seem to be looking at. And it's hard to know, well, is that because it's the new shiny thing and everybody wants to see? Or I think more likely, and we've certainly seen it just in the last couple of weeks with all the furloughs and cutbacks with the media companies and all of them saying that they're all pointing themselves towards streaming and synchronizing a lot of their programming and marketing, is that we're definitely seeing a shift to not only what they talk about, what platform, but how they're talking about those platforms. And in many ways, it's like the early days of cable, is that you've got all these services that essentially have the same message. We've got a great library of new and classic content. So how do you differentiate yourself? Of course, at some point, it comes down to titles, but when you've got literally thousands and thousands of titles, particularly just in the last few years with the golden age of television, I think it really does become difficult to differentiate yourself. And if you look at all the brand acquisition spots out there, they pretty much follow the same pattern. They've got great sound bites, great editing, great music, and pretty much a singular point of view. So it'll be interesting to see going forward how all those different services are able to differentiate themselves. And obviously they've built themselves on some very iconic brands, whether it be HBO or Apple or CBS turning into Paramount Plus.
Yep.
So how they redefine and refine those brands, that's going to be the most interesting thing to see in the next year or so.
I mean, I can understand some of the understanding why some of these platforms didn't want to get started right away because of maybe there was technological issues of being able to put servers together that will be able to hold the amount of bandwidth that's necessary to put all their content up, and to really, if they felt the need to have some kind of a way to get people to embrace the new technology. And I can just see where all that might be, what might have been the thought process, but again, they're behind the gun. You have Netflix with nearly 200 million subscribers. Disney Plus just said they now have 73 million subscribers in 6 months. It's incredible, or actually about a year or so. And you look at what's going on here with CMO Marketplace. Let's go talk more about you and with your partner, Lori Pate. She's been focused on enlisting top agency talent to the portal. And in a recent release, she says, quote, "We're really hoping to change people's habits during this odd time to get them used to this efficient new marketing tool in the same way Zoom has become useful. When we conceptualized CMO Marketplace a year ago, of course, we didn't anticipate the pandemic. And again, that goes the same way with all these streaming platforms. The pandemic has definitely changed a lot of habits now for a lot of people. Connecting buyers and sellers via an online marketplace was something we felt was already needed. The current COVID working model merely amplifies the need to connect more efficiently with new practices we should carry into the future." So how's this concept perform with the lack of in-person interaction when you've had to work with these clients and, to get them convinced and have them really have a good understanding and a grasp of what you're telling them from the data, the analytics that you offer?
Yeah, well, we really haven't had to convince them at all. Is that, using a portal these days is that we do so much online shopping. So the experience is not that much different from whether you're going to Amazon or to any shopping service where you're filtering through all these different choices, except now you're able to choose different forms of creative and different agencies. So it's very intuitive to begin with, is that people understand because they use these tools day in and day out. They may not have used it select vendors before and agencies, but in the same way that people have so easily adapted to video conferencing and Zooming to have meetings, they seem to be moving very easily and very smoothly to the marketplace. Right now, we've got, I think it's more than 150 different media companies have registered, and we've got about 25 agencies up there, and we're adding more pretty much every week now. So it does seem like it turned out to be the right tool for the right time, and we hope it is a great way for everybody to continue to work together, particularly in these really difficult times in media.
Agreed. It is difficult times, but it still comes down to the difficult times with what all these companies are doing. I mean, this is where I always have a feel where if you have such a large corporate multi-network conglomerate that's running all these networks, and they're not able to put enough attention into each product, because back in the early time when you started your firm, Lee Hunt Associates, back in the 90s, before I get my question, the idea was you had all these individual, it was always just, you had these flags being planted down along the line of a cable service, going from, say, 36 channels to 100 to 500 to 1,000. And they all had individual purposes, individual creativity, individual identities. And they might not have had the biggest budget. They might have been able to go and build, and cable's always been able to go ahead and evolve with time. When they said, okay, we need to get we can't just run, you start kind of a model of, let's put some rerun programming on, get something on to fill the lineup. Then we start adding our own original programming once we get a little bit of advertising dollars brought into the game. Then we move along, and then we get into something much more meaningful. So maybe we're going to put ourselves into some scripted content. We're going to put ourselves into some live content and move from there. And then, a lot of stations have done it that same route. They might have a couple of shows that are familiar to the audience that will draw people to that network. And there are still some channels that perform well today, say Food Network or HGTV or others. But, some of the others, they've lost their way, or they've gone to some other route that, they made themselves underperform and then it would get picked up by another network or another company, and then just be lost in translation. Now, back in the 90s, when you started Lee Hunt Associates, you said this, quote, "I couldn't think of any other networks I wanted to work with directly, so I thought maybe I'd try to work for all of them. The timing was good. It was the era of massive cable network growth, so we specialized in launching and branding cable networks primarily in the U.S., but internationally as well. Then your firm got bought by Razorfish, and you were around for the exponential growth of cable, which I just mentioned before. But do you think cable is still finding a place in this digital disruption? Is there enough reasons to not cut the cord?"
That's a really difficult question to answer now. It's interesting. For years, people have said, well, is linear television, whether it be broadcast or cable, going to continue to exist when on-demand is available everywhere? And the analogy that I've always used, it's like the sound system in your car. Is you've got a radio, which you turn on when you want somebody else to make the editorial decisions for you, which is what linear and broadcast is like. But you also have the opportunity from the early days, whether it was plugging in a cassette, an 8-track, an MP3 player, where you make those choices. And you have that sound system in your car, and you choose whichever platform you want based on whatever your mood happens to be. And I think that's what's going to happen with television entertainment as well, is that both the linear side and the on-demand streaming side will continue to coexist. Now, the balance obviously is shifting, will continue to shift. And the reality is with on-demand programming, you have an opportunity to choose so much more, and you don't have to just sit around and wait for something else to roll up. But the question about the linear cable networks, it's definitely a challenging time. And if you think about the evolution of these channels, in the early days when they launched, everybody was trying to capture a niche, whether it be a demographic niche, a programming niche, a psychographic niche. It was a big land grab at that point. And they had small audiences, but they had small budgets. But then as they began to grow and become more and more successful, at a certain point, most of these niche channels hit a glass ceiling, is that their ad sales revenue needed to increase quarter by quarter, but their small audience just wouldn't grow that much. So they recognized they needed to become a little bit broader, become a little more general entertainment oriented. And that's what you were talking about when the consolidation of a lot of different cable networks. And now obviously there are fewer niches in linear, and those niches can easily be occupied with on-demand. If you go to Pluto, whether you look at the on-demand side of it or the streaming side of it, which is faux streaming, it's a wheel, is they have hundreds of channels, and it can be the NCIS channel or the romantic comedy channel. And so that's sort of taken the place of that niche. But I don't think that linear, whether broadcast or cable, is ever going to go away, but it's definitely transforming and will continue to transform.
There are still cable channels that are doing it absolutely right and still revolutionizing themselves today. Game Show Network, I think these kind of really brought themselves back with original programming and have really brought themselves up to the forefront. Again, I mentioned Food Network, I mentioned HGTV and others. And now here's the thing I bring up. This is why I used to, when I first started this show, Lee, I actually called the show Creative versus Corporate. It wasn't the best name for the show, but it was kind of the whole concept where I am, where I really want to support content creators, and for those that are in positions of leadership that are able to go and move that forward. And for what you did yourself, you got to work with some really great leaders. And so you worked on network brand strategy for powerhouse networks like Disney Channel, USA Networks, FX, Hallmark Channel, and E. Those, again, that's just the cream of the crop of great cable channels across the board. I got to talk to Larry Namer, co-founder of E! Entertainment, when he talked about how he had Movie Time and just the building and be able to go and work with other partners to get the right talent on board, and just grassroots, just finding talent, finding programming that just was quirky enough and interesting. And I still feel like some of the energy that that channel became is still what E! is responsible for today. And the taglines, they make mention that you don't normally do taglines, but you have offered taglines for Characters Welcome for USA, which was a fantastic tagline. And you offered that up to USA Network's president, Chris McCumber, at the time. ease pop of culture. And then FX still uses Fearless. And John LaGraff, I got to tell you, I love FX. And that's been just, I wish every channel could do what they've done. AMC in the same way. But FX has always stayed consistent. I mean, there's just so many programs, scripted dramas. That's why they now have such a featured end on the Hulu streaming, because it's just great content. And I don't think you can sway away from the fact that cable and linear networks, as you say, they could always retain the audience if the content was still good, if the creative constraints were being let go and there was more creative freedom. Maybe there could be a room for, say, diversity, equity, inclusion in the boardroom or in the writers' rooms more often. Sure, a makeup or representation of America. Absolutely. But I feel like that's one thing that I'm feeling right now that doesn't help. That there's the creativity is holding back cable from the eroding of their audience.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is some really great marketing. And FX is a really good example. Yeah. It's tremendous storytelling. And it was funny, when I worked on that, and Stephanie Gibbons, who's the president of marketing, had brought us in. And it was when they were launching FXX and relaunching FXM and really looking at the portfolio. And John had said, look, we have all this different content, and we treated each one uniquely, almost like a theatrical. Like American Horror Story looks absolutely nothing like Archer, which looks absolutely nothing like any of the other shows.
Or like Pose or Sons of Anarchy, yeah. Yeah.
And they were all unique. They had their unique looks. There was no particular network look and style. So what they were really looking for was a mantra to tie it all together. And, with anything is that the simplest idea is usually the best. And it's sort of funny that it took a couple of weeks to come around after interviewing John. And I said, look, the one thing that ties everything you do together is that you guys are fearless storytellers. And whether it be comedy, animation, horror, action, that's the one thing that connects it all together. And it was funny. So I told Stephanie, I said, fearless storytelling, that's your positioning. And she went to John and said, this is what we think the answer is. He said, oh, no, definitely not. And she was like, well, why not? He said, I'm not a fearless storyteller. I'm scared shitless all the time. And she said, well, that is not your brand persona, John, and it's not ours either.
Right.
And the funny thing, because I don't write taglines, because I said, yeah, that's the right positioning. But and Stephanie said, well, I think we should use fearless as a consumer tagline. And now, looking back, it seems so obvious. But at the time, I was like, I don't know if that's consumer-facing line or not. And then she actually tested it at the upfront. They did these beautiful black and white photographs of their talent. And at the very bottom of the frame was the FX logo, not very big, and just the word fearless in not heavy type, but sort of thin type underneath it, very subtle. And I looked at those like, oh my God, it does work. So, sometimes it's the idea, but often it's the execution of that idea, whether it be on the marketing side or the content side. And that's what we found is that lots of people have great ideas, but there are only a handful that can execute them beautifully. And that's what we've seen in the success stories that you've been talking about.
And there's a lot of great programmers out there. I mean, there's others I could name, but I mean, honestly, FX that's just the epitome. I mean, I could roll off so many shows I've watched on that network and I've enjoyed in the last 2 decades. And I honestly, I've been watching Fargo now, the new season. And when I get up to the FX Now app, Fearless pops up right in front when you get that opening part. And it just reminds me, that's what just programming could be like that. And I thank God, that they still have kept to the message, kept to the marketing, and kept to the fearless type of programming. And I wish that would be a fearless idea that all these other companies would do. That is the way they should have. That's the kind of understanding. See, I feel like I don't see a lot of networks promoting a network-wide brand anymore. They want to be identified by programs or a program that viewers will watch regularly. And Over the Top has never taken that approach. So I wonder what you thought caused this omission of branding and tagging.
Well, I think part of it's a challenge of that we've moved more and more into a title-centric way of viewing. And a lot of that comes from on-demand, where you don't have to watch a channel. There are all these different titles, and they're available on lots of different platforms. So the promise of the distribution vehicle gets watered down a little bit. I remember when my daughter was 19, and she was a sophomore at NYU in the film and television program. And she watches a lot of television, but not linear television. Everything is on her laptop. And this was during close to the season finale of Breaking Bad. Mm-hmm. And she came to me one day and said, "Dad, do you realize Mad Men, The Walking Dead, and Breaking Bad are all on the same channel?" And I said, yeah, they're all on AMC. She said, "Why isn't that the most famous channel in the world?" And it said a lot about where the industry had shifted, is that these title-driven programs were really driving a lot of the viewership, and AMC was following up and catching, but wasn't necessarily leading. And that was sort of that first shift that I think we saw towards people being driven more to accepting titles of content rather than the vehicles that delivered that content. But again, if we say we don't see that on the OTT side, but if you look back at Netflix, in their earliest days of streaming, they had wonderful brand campaigns. Essentially, they positioned themselves as the cultural zeitgeist, is that they were changing the way people watch television, and they accepted it, made it part of their brand, whether they made fun of themselves with spots about binging, which was a concept that they invented, or about spoiler alerts. Or I remember a few years ago, New York Magazine wrote an article they called Netflix Adultery, about how partners would watch ahead of their spouse. And Netflix went out and fielded a research survey, and then put it out on PR. Got picked up, was one of the lead stories on NBC News, because everybody loved this idea of their spouse cheating on them on Netflix while they're watching television in bed.
Right.
From the beginning. Now Netflix, they're past that. They don't need that. They've established their brand, and people get it. And a perfect example would be that show YOU, that originally premiered on Lifetime. And it did okay, but not particularly well. And Lifetime chose not to pick it up for another season. It went to Netflix and became a huge hit. Yeah. Now, part of that was probably the platform, is that you could watch it without commercials. You could binge all the episodes at once. But also the halo surrounding Netflix, that brand is that this is something new and different. Whereas on Lifetime, the expectation was, okay, this is going to be like a Lifetime movie, a woman in distress kind of thing. So the brand halo of where you were watching it sort of shifted the way you considered this content, even though it's exactly the same show, whether you watch it on Lifetime or on Netflix. And so that halo is still there, even though it may not be so obvious. I mean, there's a reason CBS decided to change CBS All Access to Paramount Plus, which is the better known brand with the greatest history. The same thing when you put together all the elements that went into HBO Max. Well, do you want to call it Turner? Yeah, Turner is a really great brand. Yeah. But we know that HBO has always stood for the superlative, the best of the best. Right. So they still are using branding, but it's a little more subtle these days.
But you're also accustomed to paying for HBO, so it doesn't make much of a difference to go ahead and put that name in front.
Yeah, I think, it certainly wasn't a barrier to entry. And again, if I have a feel, if anything, it was probably more worrisome for HBO, is all this extra content going to begin to tarnish my brand? And I still think that that jury's still out. But it shows, how important a brand is, because a brand is simply the way you think about something. It's not the logo, it's not the tagline. It's a summation of all those things. But it's just the way you think about something, positive, negatively, or indifferently.
We're coming back with part 2 of my interview with Lee Hunt here on next week's Broadcasters Podcast. Until then, remember, content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.